Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated, and happy Epiphany. It was in Rome on December 25th, in the year of our Lord 354, when Christmas was first celebrated. And on January 6th, about 100 years later, when the church first celebrated the Epiphany, 4th and 5th centuries. The Gospel according to Matthew tells us the story behind the Feast of the Epiphany, how the Magi saw a bright star in the sky, and being astrologers, they followed the light. They believed that the star in the sky was important, as I told the children a few minutes earlier, and they wanted to learn what was behind it. So they left their countries to meet the King of the Jews, the Son of God, Jesus Emmanuel. And they brought gifts. They seem to have been like many of us when we're invited to someone special's home. We get dressed. If you're Puerto Rican, you put on a lot of cologne. You might even buy some gifts. And then we get into our version of a camel with a heart full of anticipation and expectation, and we drive there, or camel there. Slow, as someone pointed out earlier. As I reflect on the meaning of light, however, I'm reminded how throughout history, humanity is so attracted to light, to fire, to anything that shines. They call it bling nowadays. Whether it's in nature or otherwise. Think about what people around the world do when a comet is scheduled to crisscross the sky, entering and disappearing in a flash. I have a friend who's a flight attendant, and he told me how once on a flight to Alaska in the dead of the winter, the pilots called the crews into the cockpit, and they marveled in silence at the display of the celestial brightness, the northern lights, filling their view. I invite you to think how even at the sight of fireworks, man-made displays of light, we're wowed and full of joy as we marvel at the multiple colors and sounds that are in the sky as we look up and go, ooh, ah. I imagine that the three kings felt that awe and felt that joy as they followed the light leading them to Jesus. In my Christmas Eve message just a few days ago, I talked about Jesus being the light of the world. I said that light is a symbol of life, goodness, wisdom, and purity. And that when there's light, there's no darkness, because the light allows us to see things more clearly. That light was not only shining in the skies on the route to Bethlehem, that light was also shining in the hearts of the three kings. Somehow, the Magi knew that they would meet someone really special, and they walked by faith. The story of the three kings offers us an important socio-cultural lesson. In these days in which so many people in our country and the world suffer from racial discrimination and prejudice, we hear this biblical story about foreigners. Yes, foreigners who went to Israel to meet Jesus. Scholars say, and so does the Bible, that Gaspar was from Sheba, Melchior was from Arabia, and Balthazar from Egypt. Sheba, by the way, is sort of modern-day Ethiopia. All Eastern or Middle Eastern locations. But God didn't care what countries those who came to honor the God-child were from. God didn't care the color of their skin, the languages they spoke, or the wisdom they had or would have after they met the Messiah. God, the Creator, wanted them to know Jesus. And as they left the stable at the inn to continue spreading the good news about this holy child in Bethlehem, that was God's purpose. Tell the story. This was one way in which the world would learn about and follow the light of God incarnate in Jesus, and also to combat fears and help eradicate, push away the darkness of souls that are full of hatred and full of fear. As followers of Christ, I invite you to ponder for a moment, to think for a moment, what motivates you to continue believing in God? Why do you believe in God? Why do you follow the light of Christ? What is it that compels you to follow the sign of the presence of the Holy One? I wonder if someone has invited you to share your story, ever, of a sacred moment, a manifestation of God, an epiphany, so to speak. And I want to share a personal story about seeing and feeling the light, the presence of the Holy. Tomorrow is January 6th, so tomorrow is the actual feast of the Epiphany, and I'm going to celebrate 13 years of my ordination to the priesthood. It was 13 years ago when I felt the presence of the Holy. I was at St. Paul's Cathedral, downtown Boston, January 6th, 2007. The cathedral was decorated with a creche, trees, and wreaths. The church was packed. It was packed because 7 people would receive the sacrament of holy orders that day. It was a cold day, a very cold day, and I remember that because my dad won't let me forget how much he loves me. So much so that he went to New England in the dead of winter from Puerto Rico to be with me. He loves me. It was in the liturgy when the bishop saying prayers to initiate the sacrament of holy orders when I felt someone behind me. I've shared this story with some of you, many of you at different times. I felt the hand on my shoulder, and so I turned around, thinking that my parents had come forward too soon, because in the liturgy of the ordination, Parker and your family members, your loved ones, they are invited by the bishop to come to the altar rail with you and present you by name before you take your vows. But when I turned around, they weren't there. My parents were in their seats. So I turned my attention back to the bishop as she continued to pray. But again, sort of moments later, I felt that same presence behind me, and I turned around again, and nothing. Hours later, while we were cleaning up after the party at my house, of course there was a party, my mom asked me why I kept turning around. I told her that I realized it was the presence of Jesus, because I really knew that I was with Jesus in that moment. I knew because they weren't standing there. And there was a presence on my shoulder, holding, touching, and I felt it. I told her how my mind was flooded with this awareness of Christ. It's as if it were an affirmation and the realization that I wasn't alone in this journey, that he would be by my side, and that I would stand up no matter how many times I fell, because Jesus would be there to pick me up. Amen. I knew that. That's my light story. I'll never forget the expression on my mom's face as I told her what was going on in me. I didn't realize until probably several years later what my story must have meant to her. Mom understood and felt the presence too. Her look, that face, must have been like the Virgin Mary's after the shepherds proclaimed that they had seen the Son of God. Because Mary pondered, and my mom sort of drifted as I was talking to her about it. Mary, like Mom, remained silent. And whatever was on her heart remained there. So this is my story of Christ's light. And I invite you once again to reflect on your story of Christ's light. I invite you to reflect on, why is it that you believe? What light has revealed the presence of the Holy to you? And in that moment that I just described, I can affirm to you, like the day is old, I knew Christ was with me. I knew that I was being affirmed, and that he wanted me to know without a shadow of a doubt that he was my God, my brother, and my light. What's your story? Amen.
Amen.
Amen.